I'm Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I had everything figured out. I had a good job, a husband who I thought understood me, and a life I had planned since high school. But now I can't help but wonder when everything started to go wrong. How did I get here? How did one comment change everything? I had always thought that I was a pretty easygoing person. Life, after all, isn't meant to be a constant struggle, right? But lately, everything felt like it was slowly falling apart. Michael and I had been married for 4 years, but those 4 years weren't exactly a walk in the park. Don't get me wrong, we loved each other. At least I thought we did, but marriage, as I quickly learned, is a lot harder than I imagined. It's the little things, the day-to-day friction that builds up over time unnoticed. And that night, everything seemed to be weighing on me more than usual. We had just returned home after a long, exhausting day at work. Michael had been working late, and I had spent the day dealing with deadlines, angry clients, and the ever-present pressure of keeping up with everything. I was feeling overwhelmed, and all I wanted to do was relax. But instead, we found ourselves once again locked in a small argument. We didn't argue loudly or with raised voices. In fact, it wasn't even anything specific that sparked it. It was just one of those stupid moments where the tension between us finally had to be released, and it all came out over something trivial. Maybe it was how he hadn't cleaned the dishes yet, or how we couldn't decide on dinner plans for the umpteenth time. I can't believe we're still arguing about this, I said, throwing my hands up in frustration. You know, sometimes I honestly regret marrying you. I didn't mean it. Not at all. It was just a poorly timed joke, a way to relieve the tension and diffuse the growing irritation. But as the words left my mouth, I saw his face change. It wasn't the playful, teasing reaction I expected. Instead, his smile faded and his eyes, those eyes that once made me feel so safe, became distant, cold. I froze for a second, unsure of how to react. Michael, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke, I stammered, trying to backpedal. You know I don't regret marrying you. I was just upset about work but it was too late. He didn't say anything. He just stood there silent, staring at me as if he'd never heard me before. And in that moment, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about my words. It was about something deeper. There had been cracks in our relationship for months, maybe even years. I had ignored them, brushed them aside, thinking they would go away on their own. But they didn't. Michael didn't snap at me or yell. But the way he turned and walked out of the room without another word left an impression on me. It wasn't a big blow-up fight, but it was just different. Something in the air had changed. And all of a sudden, I wasn't sure if we could fix it. The morning after the argument felt like a cloud had settled over the house. Michael woke up early as usual, but there was something off about the way he moved around the kitchen. Normally, he would greet me with a quick kiss or a sarcastic comment about our lack of breakfast choices. But today he was silent, almost too silent. I noticed it immediately, and it left a knot in my stomach. I tried to act normal, pretending like everything was fine, but the tension between us was palpable. I watched him make coffee, his movements mechanical and detached. Every small action felt like it was happening in slow motion, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. I decided to make small talk, hoping to ease the awkwardness. Do you want me to grab some groceries later? I asked, trying to sound casual. I thought we could make pasta tonight, your favorite. He didn't respond right away. He just sipped his coffee and stared out the window. I tried again, asking him about his plans for the day, but the response I got was a vague, "I'll be busy, but we'll talk later." Talk later? That's what he said every time there was an issue, and it never led to anything. Just more silence and empty promises. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that maybe he was just tired. But when I saw him walking past the bedroom with a suitcase in hand, I froze. "Michael, where are you going?" My voice trembled slightly, unsure if I had already guessed what was happening. He stopped, glancing at me without really looking at me. His eyes were distant, colder than I had ever seen them. There was a look in his expression, one I couldn't decipher, that made my heart race. "I'm leaving," he said flatly. I blinked, convinced I hadn't heard him correctly. "What? Leaving? What do you mean leaving?" He didn't elaborate, just continued to zip up his suitcase, his movements stiff and robotic. "I'm not happy here, Sarah. Not anymore. You said it yourself last night." You regret marrying me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never expected him to take that offhand comment seriously. It was supposed to be a joke, a stupid moment of venting, not something that would actually make him reconsider everything. No, Michael, I said quickly, stepping toward him. I didn't mean it like that. I was frustrated, just a bad moment. You know I love you. But he held up his hand, cutting me off. No, Sarah. I don't think you do. I don't think you understand how much you've hurt me. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when it's not. When you say things like that, it makes me question if I even belong here. I felt a lump in my throat, and I tried desperately to find the right words. Michael, please. Don't do this. We can talk about it, fix things. I swear I didn't mean it. Don't leave me like this. But he was already at the door, suitcase in hand. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving me standing there in shock. The sound of the door clicking shut behind him echoed in the empty room, and I realized I was standing alone, with nothing but the hollow space where my words and his love had once been. I hadn't expected him to leave. Not like this. Not over a stupid joke. And yet, there he was, walking away from everything we had built. The days following Michael's departure felt like an endless blur. Each morning I woke up with the hope that the previous day's events had been some sort of bad dream, but reality always hit me like a cold slap in the face, reminding me that he was gone. The house felt different. Empty, quieter than I ever remembered it being. I couldn't stop replaying our last conversation over and over in my head, trying to understand how it all unraveled so quickly. Was it really just one offhand remark that caused him to leave? Or had something been building for a long time, something I had failed to notice? I spent hours alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos of us, wondering where we had gone wrong. There were pictures from our wedding day, photos from trips we'd taken, and moments that once felt full of hope and love. It all seemed like a different life now, like it belonged to someone else. What had happened to the connection we once had? When did things begin to fall apart? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the cracks in our relationship had been there long before that fateful night. I had just ignored them, convincing myself that we were fine. One evening I called my best friend, Emily. She had always been the one I turned to when I needed to talk through things, but this time, the conversation felt different. I was lost, grasping for answers I didn't have, and I needed her to help me make sense of it all. Sarah, you've been together for years, Emily said after I explained everything. You know as well as I do that one joke doesn't break a marriage. If that comment hurt him so much, it's because there were deeper issues. Maybe he's been feeling unappreciated for a while, and you just didn't notice. Her words hit me hard. She was right. How often had I come home after a long day and vented my frustrations without thinking about how Michael might be feeling? How many times had I assumed he was okay without checking in on him, without asking if he needed support? I had been so wrapped up in my own stress and work pressures that I didn't see how much he was struggling too. As I reflected, I began to realize that we had been living like roommates for the past year or so, not like a married couple. There were no more spontaneous date nights. No more deep conversations about our hopes and dreams. We had fallen into a routine, a predictable, comfortable routine, but in doing so, we had lost the intimacy that once defined our relationship. I had thought that love would just sustain itself, that things would work out without much effort, but now I saw that love wasn't enough on its own. It needed attention, care, and most of all communication. I've been selfish, I whispered to myself as the realization hit me. It wasn't just Michael who had pulled away, it was both of us. We had both stopped trying, both stopped nurturing the relationship that once made us so happy. I was angry with myself for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs that something was wrong, for not doing more to protect what we had. But even more than that, I was scared. Scared that it was too late to fix things, that Michael wouldn't come back, and that I had ruined everything for good. But then something inside me clicked. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. If there was a chance to make things right, I had to try. I had to fight for what we had, fight for the love we had once shared. But how could I even begin to fix something I hadn't realized was broken? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to start somewhere. And that somewhere was with me. It had been a week since Michael left, and every day felt like an eternity. I tried to fill the empty space with work, keeping myself busy, but the absence of his presence in the house was impossible to ignore. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how his silence seemed to speak volumes. He wasn't coming back, not with the way he'd left. But still, a part of me held on to a tiny shred of hope. What if he just needed time? What if this was a momentary reaction and once he cooled off he'd come back? The thought kept me going even as the doubt crept in. One afternoon while I was sitting in the living room, sorting through some old bills, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it, unsure of what to expect. My heart skipped a beat when I heard his voice on the other end. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice sounding raw, almost hesitant. I need to talk to you." I froze. It had been days since I last heard his voice, and now it felt like the weight of everything was crashing down on me all at once. Was this it? Was he finally coming back? Or was he calling to end things once and for all? "Michael," I said, trying to steady my breath. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm at a friend's place. I needed some time to think. I didn't mean to make you think it was over." There was a long pause. "But after everything, I don't know what to think anymore." His words were like a lifeline thrown into the stormy waters I had been drowning in. He was uncertain, he was confused just like I was. That was all I needed to hear. We were still in this together, in some form. But the weight of the situation was still heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I shouldn't have walked out like that. I should have communicated better. I've been feeling lost. I didn't realize how much I was shutting you out." The sincerity in his voice made my heart ache. I had spent so much time focusing on my own mistakes that I hadn't realized just how much he was struggling too. He wasn't just angry with me. He was angry with himself, frustrated with the distance between us that neither of us had addressed. "I'm sorry too," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I should have seen it. I've been so wrapped up in my own world that I didn't even notice you pulling away. I was too busy with work and I took you for granted." I took us for granted. There was another pause, but this time it was filled with understanding, with the weight of years of shared moments finally coming to the surface. "I miss you, Sarah," he finally said, his voice filled with emotion. "I miss us. I'm not sure what happens next, but I'm willing to try if you are." The words hung in the air, suspended in that moment of raw honesty. I could feel the tension, but there was something else there too. Something deeper, something I hadn't felt in weeks. It was hope. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe we could rebuild what we had, piece by piece, and find a way to move forward together. "I want to try too," I replied, my voice stronger now. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." After everything that had happened, the unexpected turn of events brought a glimmer of hope into my life. We weren't out of the woods yet. There was still a lot of healing to be done, a lot of trust to be rebuilt. But this moment felt like the first step towards something new. Something that could be stronger, more honest, and more real than before. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this. Together. It had been a few weeks since Michael and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding what we had. The road wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like we were going backward instead of forward, but somehow we were learning how to communicate in a way we hadn't done in a long time. For the first time in months, we were listening to each other. Not just hearing words, but truly understanding one another's emotions and needs. The space between us, once filled with anger and resentment, started to feel less like a chasm and more like a bridge, fragile but present. We weren't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and I could tell we both carried scars from the past that weren't going to vanish overnight. But something had shifted. The weight of the misunderstanding and the emotional walls we had built around ourselves was beginning to crack. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, Michael turned to me, his face thoughtful. He was holding a cup of tea, his fingers tracing the rim as if he was choosing his words carefully. "You know," he started, "I've been thinking a lot about that night, the night I left. I don't want to use it as an excuse, but I've realized something." I looked at him, waiting. This was the Michael I hadn't seen in a while, the one who was open, vulnerable, and willing to share. "What is it?" "It wasn't just about the comment you made," he said slowly. "It was about how I felt invisible. You were so consumed by everything going on around you that I felt like I didn't matter anymore. And I didn't know how to tell you that without sounding like I was complaining." I felt a pang of guilt but also an understanding. All this time I had assumed it was about my words, my failure to communicate, but Michael had been silently struggling too. He had felt neglected, unheard, and I hadn't noticed. "I'm sorry, Michael," I said softly. "I never meant for you to feel that way. I was so focused on my own stress, my own problems that I didn't even realize what you were going through." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know, and I should have said something earlier, but I didn't. I kept quiet, thinking it would just get better on its own. But that's not how relationships work, is it?" "No," I answered, my voice firm with the newfound understanding. "They don't. I should have been more aware of your feelings, and I shouldn't have pushed you to the side, even unintentionally. I've realized that now." We sat there in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of our conversation. It wasn't a dramatic, sweeping revelation that suddenly fixed everything. It was the quiet acknowledgement of the flaws that both of us had ignored for far too long. And in that silence, we both knew something had changed. We weren't the same people we were before, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. "I don't want to give up on us," I said, my voice a little shaky but determined. "I know we've made mistakes, but I believe we can make it work. We just have to keep trying, keep being honest with each other." Michael's gaze softened and he reached out, taking my hand in his. "I agree. I don't want to lose you, Sarah. I've realized that, despite everything, I still love you. And I want to build something stronger, something better, from what we've been through." It wasn't the fairy tale ending that some people might expect from a love story. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic apology, but what we had was something more real. Something that was built on understanding, patience, and the willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths that had been lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't perfect, and we knew there was still a lot of work ahead of us, but we were ready to face it together. As the weeks passed, we continued to rebuild, one conversation, one small gesture at a time. We learned how to communicate without fear, to be honest even when the truth was hard to hear. There were moments when the old patterns crept back in, when the fear of being vulnerable made us retreat, but each time we pulled ourselves back to each other. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And one evening as we sat together, watching the sunset from our porch, Michael turned to me with a small, sincere smile. "You know," he said, "I don't regret calling you that night. It was hard and it hurt, but it was the wake-up call we needed." I smiled back, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "I don't regret it either. Sometimes, it takes something breaking to realize what really matters." In the end, it wasn't the joke that had caused the break. It was the silence that followed, the unspoken distance between us. But through the pain and the uncertainty, we had found a way back to each other. And that, I realized, was worth every tear, every moment of doubt. We weren't perfect and we didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in a long time, we were both willing to try. Together. And that was enough.